Hello, everyone. It's great to be back. Now, in this episode, we were supposed to do a book review. It was supposed to be a book review of Richard Hanania's book, Kakistocracy: Why Populism Ends in Disaster. And I will get to that. I'm about 120 pages plus some change in, and it's good. It's a declarative book, it's substantive. I like Richard Hanania's concise and very information dense way of writing things. And so eventually we're going to get to that. But unfortunately or unfortunately, I got in a Twitter spat the other day. First of all, follow me on Twitter. I definitely need some followers at Sesu Studios. I was on Twitter today and I was looking at some of the visuals presented by one of these right-wing public intellectuals that we see who post a lot of like data-related things. His name is Cremieux. It's named after I think some like French type of figure. And this guy, if you're on Twitter and you're around like the public policy or intellectual side of politics on Twitter, you know that this guy, he posts a lot of like different things. And he's a relatively high stature, and he's posted to is definitely some kind of type of topics, and he kind of presents he gets into types of like race science and these types of things from that like a lot of people, even people who would consider themselves conservative, find extraordinarily distasteful. And so I got into a Twitter spat with him, and I accused of the way that he presents data. I found to be a bit misleading and misrepresenting. And so before we get into this, I want to be clear with any type of biases that I might have. I do find the way that he talks about certain topics, I find it quite distasteful, particularly the fact that he regularly talks about like race science and this type of stuff. And I find this distasteful first and foremost because you're attacking people for things that they were just born with. Why would you attack somebody for being like genetically inferior when nobody chooses what type of race that they're born with or sex or gender or any of these types of intrinsic traits? And he goes into like saying how this race is like genetically dumb or stuff like this. And first of all, the we should all try to criticize actions. We should try to like criticize things that people can have control over so that they can reform instead of criticizing things that people are born with. But then second of all, it's kind of a defeatist attitude to try to paint an entire group of people as like just genetically inferior or something, because you're kind of stripping any agency that they have to make the best out of their life. If somebody really believes that they were just born and they were just born way behind anybody else, then like you need to make people believe that they have the ability to become smart, to become successful, and all of these things, which are absolutely true. I do believe that everybody can succeed. And so we go to the main topic of today. And Cremieux, he was over the last couple of days, he's been posting a lot of different charts about GDP growth from different administrations. And I think that this is pretty neat. But the way that he was presenting the visuals, I was a little bit worried about the way that he was presenting them on if they were particularly an honest way of doing things. And so we'll start out with just the latest post that he posted, where he was just posting the Singapore real GDP per capita growth under every government. And this is for Singapore. And we look at this data and it definitely shows that Lee Kuan Yew has had extraordinary economic growth. And if you were to like get into very technical, I think that this is true. But one of the things you notice is that Lee Kuan Yew has been governing for a very long time, about 30 years. And if we look at some of the others, Goh Chok Tong or Lee Hsien Loong or Lawrence Wong, these people have been governing for much lower. Now, if you look at the start, everything starts at a 100% index and then it grows. But one of the things you can like pretty quickly understand from any type of data that involves exponential growth is that as the years pass by, even if something has the same GDP growth, like for example, 2% or 2.5%, even if that's the same, as the years go by, it starts slanting up more and more. And so what this might do is that it might exaggerate some of the growth we see from types of leaders that have very long tenures. And so I quote tweeted this and I said, okay, And this was in the context of the fact that he posted many of these types of charts. If you just post like one of these charts, I'm honestly not super big of a stickler on like making sure that every visual that you post is like 100% A plus in terms of quality and making sure that you're not misrepresenting things. But as we see here, Cremieux has posted like 12 of these types of charts. And I'm like, okay, if you're going to be posting like 12 of these, then we should make sure that we be a little bit more critical of if this is exactly the way that things should be posted. And so, in the context of this, I quote tweeted and I said, Cremieux is a pernicious type of liar. Regardless of any given results, he should know that it would be more honest to display a GDP growth per year alongside with each line, as the current format visually exaggerates the growth of those with long tenures. And then I gave him like an example. So like in this chart, we see this is for United States real GDP per capita under each presidential party era. And Cremieux says, I don't think you can cleanly ascribe growth or recessions to presidents, but this is nevertheless a pretty cool type of chart. Imagine living under JFK/LBJ or Reagan Bush and seeing GDP go up so much in a few years. Now, one of the things that you notice here is if we were to like look at this line, if you look at the Clinton line, this seems to be a little bit steeper than even the Reagan Bush years. So if your goal is to represent like which administrations had the strongest economic growth, which I presume is the purpose of this, why not put Clinton instead of Reagan? Well, we'll get into that. And so I quote tweeted and I said, you would never know from this chart that Bill Clinton had a higher real GDP per capita growth per year than Reagan/Bush. Surely that's what matters. And anyway, so Cremieux really did not like this. He was really mad. So he responded to me and he says, accusing people of lying because you don't like a very normal, typically presented visualization is a special kind of retarded. You should feel shame for being so unintelligent and angry. And so I replied to him and I said, I am sincere in believing that you misrepresent or bias, often through omission. And then he responded, I will take this as an admission that you're not very intelligent. Okay, so let's go through the Bill Clinton chart and let's talk about what we mean when we say this. So, United States real GDP per capita under each presidential party era. Now, what we see when we look at the Reagan Bush era, this lasted 12 years, and you see that it got about 27% real GDP per capita growth over these 12 years. If we look at Bill Clinton, in 8 years, he got 23%. Now, before we even do any math to find the compounded annual growth rate, what we see is that Bill Clinton grew, while he didn't grow as much as Reagan Bush in absolute years, he also had 4 years less years to work with. And so 23%, well, that's only shall we say, maybe around 80 to 85%, somewhere in that ballpark range of the total growth that we saw under Reagan Bush. But he did this in 66% of the time or 67% of the time. Now, if you were trying to get any kind of metric to like assess how effective somebody has been in anything, and they say that, they got 100 units of product productivity done and they got that done in 12 years. And then another person, they were able to get around 85-ish% of that, but they were able to do that in 66% of the time. You would usually traditionally say that that second person actually was a little bit more efficient, or they were more productive in how they went about things, because that person got more done, they got more things once you control for time. And so now we go into finding what is the exact math of this. And so I did the calculations, or rather I asked ChatGPT to, because I wanted to make sure that I got everything correctly. And what you end up seeing is in this chart, in this table, it shows the Reagan Bush administrations, the Clinton administration. The cumulative growth under Reagan/Bush was 26.8%. Under Clinton, it was 22.5%. Now, Reagan and Bush was 12 years and Clinton was 8 years. So if we were to find the compounded annual growth rate, under Reagan/Bush, it was 2%, and under Clinton, it was 2.6%. And if we go back to this chart, if you're just like looking at this at first glance, you wouldn't really know this unless you're like really paying attention. You see, oh, maybe if we were to get a line from the first point to the end point of Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, and then Clinton, the Clinton line is actually a little bit steeper. And so, but because the end point of Reagan Bush is higher, you wouldn't know this. And what do you know? Cremieux, in his tweet and containing this chart, he didn't include Bill Clinton. Well, this goes into a major theme that I see with Cremieux. This is like the biggest example, but Cremieux, when I said at the very beginning, I said Cremieux is a pernicious type of liar. Pernicious means subtle. The way that he presents data, he's not going to outright lie about things like you might see with Trump, right? When Trump is talking about things, he will just outright blatantly lie. And then, of course, people will correct him for it. Now, Cremieux, he likes to present himself as a public intellectual. And he knows that if he were to just outright lie with things, then people would call him out and he would lose his credibility. And so he does a little bit of a more pernicious type of lying in that he's very selective on the type of topics that he talks about and the way that he presents them. And very frequently, the way that he presents them is in a way that biases the right wing. And so but the thing is that this pernicious type of lying is more difficult to kind of like to call out explicitly than a Trumpian type of lie where he's just straight up lying, right? This is a lying through omission. And like in another context that I'll give you is that Cremieux really likes to talk about how he loves a high trust society. I want a society that is high trust. And what he uses, part of the reason why he might talk about this is he wants to use this as a justification for purging and destroying people that he considers as low trust, people that he sees as unintelligent or poor, or in the context of race science, racists that he thinks are very bad. And so he's like very, shall we say, he's like very brutalist in how he views like types of punishments for like different types of crime or people who are stupid that he thinks as stupid. And so like this is kind of mentality has also always bothered me a little bit. And so he really talks about how he likes high trust societies, but he will never criticize the Trump administration for the party that he supports for being probably one of the lowest trust administrations we've ever seen. Trump has an unprecedented level of corruption, an unprecedented level of lying. He shows out crypto scams to his own followers. He took a multi-hundred million dollar bribe, million bribe from Qatar in the form of a jumbo jet, accepting a jumbo jet. He pardons people who have done favors for him, who's committed like very bad types of financial crimes. He'll pardon them in return for them giving like a financial favor to the people close to him or just him directly. He appoints some very, shall we say, like very unqualified people to lead his departments. People like Pete Hegseth or RFK Jr. or like Tulsi Gabbard or these types of people. And so in so many ways, Trump, his brand of populism, which we're actually going to cover in this book review, stay tuned if you see it. Trump in so many ways represents this low trust type of things. And you would think that if Cremieux had a really principled support in support of a high trust society, you would think that Cremieux would be calling this type of stuff out constantly. But Cremieux, and including one of the most blatant examples I remember is when Trump was actively violating the independence of the Federal Reserve, and he even like really aggressively tried to get Jerome Powell fired. So much to the point where Jerome Powell basically at one point, a couple of months ago, he was posting basically a hostage video. And he was saying, okay, these people want me to do shit that is completely violating the entire point of the independence of the Federal Reserve. If Cremieux, who cares about GDP growth, who cares about the economy, who cares about stability, and first and foremost, who cares about a high trust society, you would think that he would call this out. But he posted nothing. And so all of this is to say that Cremieux's type of lying is that he will never really call out any very substantial criticism of right-wing governments or right-wing people, even though there are many of them. In fact, he lives in the country where the current right-wing government has many low trust problems, many problems with how they do things. And and so I just wanted to put this out there first and foremost because I disagree with the type of way that he presents data. And then second of all, because he was really nasty to me. He was really nasty to me. He called me retarded. And then when I did, like, I think a professional response saying, I'm just sincere in believing that you misrepresent or bias, often through omission, he just said, I will take that as an admission that you are not very intelligent. And so, okay, if you're going to be a little bit of a dick, then I think it would be important to just make a video calling you out for what I think is misrepresentation of data. And if you want going forward to present yourself as a public intellectual, then I do think that you should put more effort in how you present data so that it is more honest. And quite frankly, you should stop lying through omission. It's so great to see you guys. If you're watching and you have a Twitter account, please follow me. I do need followers, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video.